I've been deceived. For years, I have ingested the slew of PlayStation nostalgia videos. So naturally, after hearing over and over how the PlayStation 1 is a bastion for interesting and unique gaming experiences, I got one. I soon realized that although there is a lot of unique games, most of them were not really polished. Not in the modern sense, where they feel incomplete and buggy, but in the sense that the devs didn't really have an idea of how players would feel or would experience the games they were making. I feel like a lot of these games needed more play testing. Resident Evil 3 is a great example of this, with a mostly cool experience that gets ruined by sudden and crazy difficulty spikes. Tomb Raider was popular because of the horn dogging surrounding Lara Croft. This gameplay is torture. There's things to love here with the mansion being cool as fuck, but goddamn. Don't get me wrong, there are some really good PlayStation 1 games. Check out my video on that. But most of my experiences on the PlayStation 1 have been like Resident Evil 3 and Tomb Raider. Couple that together with a serious lack of split screen and performance issues, I chalked it up to 5th generation consoles and their games being more so of a rough proof of concept of how video games in 3D spaces could be, rather than actual full-fledged games like their 6th generation counterparts. But then I played Mario 64. The movement, camera, combat, and exploration blew Tomb Raider 2 out of the water. And it came out an entire year before it. It also looks a lot better than Tomb Raider 2. That's when I realized the PlayStation 1 wasn't a product of its time. It just lacked the stern oversight and quality control of the Nintendo 64. So today I'm Pliskin, and I'm going to walk you through Nintendo 64 games that hold up to contemporary standards. This isn't a video for people that grew up with the N64. This is a video of Nintendo 64 game recommendations for non-boomers. In my PS1 video, I failed to mention just how good the original Resident Evil 2 is. It's the solid gameplay loop of Resident Evil 1 from 1996 and the story and environmental upgrades of Resident Evil 3 released in 1999. Without the bare-bones feel of Resident Evil 1 and the roadblocks of Resident Evil 3. Luckily for me, there's a port on the Nintendo 64 that's actually superior to the PS1 1998 release. The 1999 Nintendo 64 version of Resident Evil 2 comes with an item randomizer that adds replay value, a blood meter that controls the amount of gore on screen, and bonus files that show off the cancelled Resident Evil 0 Nintendo 64 game. Aside from that, it's the same glorious polished Resident Evil 2 with Leon and Claire's A and B routes, the bonus modes, and the fair difficulty throughout. In fact, I'd go as far to say that the Nintendo 64 version of Resident Evil 2, the GameCube's Resident Evil Remake, and 8th gen consoles Resident Evil 7 are the best ways to experience a classic survival horror Resident Evil game. But yeah, a better version of a game packed onto a 64 megabyte cartridge with more content than its PlayStation 1 gigabyte plus disc set. Nintendo knew how to make more with less. And you know what? They still do, but that's a topic for another video. Speaking of doing more with less, how is Ocarina of Time even a thing? A day and night cycle, towns and shops like this bitch is Skyrim, and a proper ass set of cinematics. The camera and controls can be rough, but in a deliberate sort of way, like how original Resident Evil 4 and original Snake Eater have a hard adjustment period with the controls. You can and will get used to them. Other than that, progression goes at a pretty steady pace. Hell, my experiences with PS1 games, like the first Dino Crisis, had me thinking this section infiltrating the castle was gonna be a lot more complicated than it ended up being. I thought I had to do something with this stone or this chicken at a specific time of day to get past the guards, but after 30 minutes of dicking around, I realized I just had to walk around them. There's momentum, adventure, and more than an N64 game has any business being. Easily the best single-player game I've played on this console. But if I wanted single-player, I would go back to PS1. But I have family and friends and a social childhood that has inspired my love for split screen. I know Smash Bros. And you know Smash Bros. I don't need to tell you that Smash Bros. Is awesome. So when I tell you that the first Smash Bros. Released on N64, you know at the very least it's going to be a good game that gives you a good time. There are 12 players you and 3 friends can play as: Mario, Yoshi, Donkey Kong, Link, Samus, Kirby, Fox, and Pikachu as starters, and Luigi, Jigglypuff, Captain Falcon, and Ness as unlockables. There are 9 stages, with Mushroom Kingdom being the only unlockable. That's not including the single-player mode exclusive maps. There's a lot less content than its modern counterparts, however, all the elements you love in Smash can be found here. It's not as big, but it definitely holds up, and it's definitely worth getting. So you know how Resident Evil 4 is considered to be the original third-person shooter that introduced laser sight aiming? It's not. WinBack released in 1999, 6 years before Resident Evil 4, and I mean, like, just look at this. The laser sight aiming doesn't feel anywhere near as good as Resident Evil, having you instead rely on a generous auto-aim system for engagements with enemies, but the auto-aim really works well actually, so it's not too much of an issue. Manual aiming is more so for range shots or for shooting out laser grid control points that kind of act as ways to disable traps. There's also that hard to learn but deliberate control scheme we talked about with Resident Evil 4 and Snake Eater. Vaulting, running, crouching, and holy shit, cover-based shooting before Gears of War. The campaign is like Resident Evil 4 meets Metal Gear, as you gun your way through a terrorist base, fighting bosses, and stopping a borderline sci-fi level threat. It's replayable as your ending depends on the speed at which you beat the game. So after you run through it, fumbling and adjusting to the controls, you can go back again and get the good ending. There is a single-purpose sandbox, a Terminator-inspired 1911, like Resident Evil 4, that has infinite ammo and serves as a consistent, reliable, and versatile jack-of-all-trades, master of none. An MP5 that does 2 times the damage due to a higher fire rate, a Spaz 12 that acts as a crowd control or high damage close range option, and then of course you have a few gimmicky power weapons. There's also a split-screen multiplayer with a balancing set for 2 players and a separate balancing set for 3 to 4 players. 2-player modes range from death matches to competitive shooting matches, and a tournament mode for if you only have 2 controllers but you have multiple people that want to play. So basically when one person dies, they tag out the controller to someone next to them, and that next person comes in as another character. But the opponent's health, ammo, and all that other stuff carries over into that match with the next person. The 3 to 4 player modes are a little bit more restrictive with character choice, but they feature color coding so that when you have the screen split 4 ways, it's a lot easier to track down who's who and keep score and just generally keep your awareness of the match that way. So you have a solid campaign, a solid single-purpose sandbox, a split-screen multiplayer that's good for 2 to 4 players, hell even more if you consider the tournament mode. Learning curve aside, this is a really damn good game. Family, friends, old people, young people, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, hell, even 1 person. Mario Party 3 is the ultimate party game. The start of the century saw a peak game, showing that the end of the Nintendo 64's life cycle was just as strong as its launch. Mario Party 3 features more characters, including my Nintendo wife, more minigame variety, and more ways to play. With a full roster of 4 players, Mario Party 3 is a deadly game of emotional manipulation, button mashing, and begging for mercy as the tables turn on the flip of a dime when your lead turns into last place. Drama, betrayal, and pure adrenaline. You'll find what all those Call of Duty adverts promise you right here in Mario Party 3 all the way back in 2000. As soon as AI is added into the game, it becomes a cooperative man versus machine battle for survival. The different AI characters all have unique personalities. Luigi is an airhead. There's no real threat here, and a lot of the other ones tend to be pretty balanced. But Peach. Peach is diabolical. She has no contempt for her human masters. She sees flesh as weak, the soul a burden. Unless all efforts are dedicated to putting her down, you will be consumed. There's also a single player mode. I haven't tried it, but it's there. Still, when it comes to split screen, couch play, party games, this is one of the best games I have ever played in my entire life. Before getting to my number 1 pick, I wanted to go over a few good games that I couldn't recommend for non-boomer audiences for one reason or another. Mario 64 is good. The castle is an iconic blueprint for pretty much every hub world since, the sound font is as iconic as Christ on the cross, and it's really fun, with tons of replayability and unlockable secrets. The only thing is that it's just really hard. Banjo-Kazooie seems really cool, but I haven't played it that much past the tutorial, so I don't feel knowledgeable enough to give it a rating in this video. Majora's Mask is another strong, late Nintendo 64 game from the year 2000. The only issue with it is that you can't really take too long of a break in between play sessions. If you forget the secret password to go down an alleyway, or forget another niche happening at a given time, you're gonna be pretty lost and have to work from ground zero. Since playing with a notebook to keep little reminders for yourself every time you play is a little too hardcore for most people, I went with Ocarina. Mario Party 2 is special to me. It's my personal favorite and will be covered intensively in the future. Mario Party 3 is just better to recommend generally due to the quality of life improvements and the added content. It's fun solo, it's fun with 2 people, it's fun with 3 people, it's fun with 4 people, it's a racer, and it's a vehicular combat game, unmatched by its contemporaries and even by future non-Nintendo releases. It's Mario Kart 64. I've never really been a fan of racers, with Ridge Racer 4 being an exception, but Mario 64 is so much more than a racer. There's racing mechanics, drifting, handling turns, and avoiding hazards, but there's items placed on the map that are balanced for defending your position in first, like the banana, and items that help turn the tide when you're behind, like the dreaded blue shell. What I really enjoy is the battle mode. 4 maps that offer unique combat encounters. There's Big Donut, where cover needs to be utilized to hide from red shells, and the spaces in between said cover become a major trap zone that punish you for trying to dodge too wide by having you fall into a lava pit. Block Fort is a base-to-base combat setup where the floor beneath the colored forts becomes a death zone, leading the action to take place on the claustrophobic forts and their connecting bridges. Double Deck is all about verticality. Place traps to block access to certain floors, drive off ledges to dodge red shells, The power dynamics involved with positioning changes based on the items picked up, keeping every time you play this map pretty fresh feeling. And Skyscraper demands precision and absolute mastery of both the movement and combat mechanics. Whichever way you decide to play, racing or fighting, single or with a ton of people, Mario Kart 64 is going to be fun every single time. This is easily my favorite N64 game that I truly believe anyone and everyone can enjoy regardless of age and skill. I like split screen. I like simple, shorter, balanced games. Color usage, limited sandbox, and a focus on fun. When it comes to the replayability, bang for your buck, and fun with friends experience, the Nintendo 64 holds up better than a lot of other consoles. Especially, I'd argue, better than the digital online-only based consoles like the Xbox Series S. Hopefully, you too can enjoy some of these games and fall in love with a console that puts player experience before shareholder demands.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.